Is first settled by the Jebusites. They take this little tiny triangle over here. You can see the big houses. Get rid of those big houses for the moment. Just look at the little tiny triangle. Don't even go up as far as the area of the Temple Mount for the moment. Just look at the valley, the Kidron and the central valley through here. You can see there's a little V like that, yeah, of land. That is what, and down at the very bottom in the Kidron is the one spring of Jerusalem known as the Gihon spring. And David is standing somewhere over on that side, and he's looking across and he sees this little city that he's, even those blind and lame, if they're on the walls, can protect it because of those two valleys, the Central Valley, the Tyropoeon Valley, and the Kidron Valley. Those valleys are what protects the original little piece of Jerusalem. And then he says, the guy that's going to be my general, which is Joab ben Tzeruiah in the Bible, he potholes his way up from the water spring, which is down in the bottom of the Kidron. He finds the way into the water tunnel and makes his way into the city, and he takes the city from the inside. That then becomes the original city of David. Right? When we talk about the very first part of Jerusalem being the capital of Israel, we're talking about that little tiny triangle of land over there. That is the size as it was at the time of David. And then, remember, he buys the threshing floor, and the threshing floor is up there somewhere in the area of the Temple Mount. Okay, so understand that it was much higher up. And at the time of Solomon, he will build the temple up there, and then he will build a wall that will go around the temple. So all of Jerusalem in the first temple period was the little city of David and the area of the temple of Solomon, a wall all the way around it. And remember, there's no platform or anything. You walk up the hill to the temple. So tomorrow you're going to see all that at the city of David. You'll see the movie about it. It'll make more sense maybe, and you'll kind of picture how it used to be. And then the northern kingdom is destroyed by the Assyrians, and there's this big population explosion because Jews running from the northern kingdom come and settle down here, and they can't fit in this little tiny piece of land, and so they go and settle on this hill because of the valley of Gehenna. Always understand that they settle within the valley so that they're safe. Okay, and it isn't until Hezekiah, which is of course he's king in Judah after the Assyrians have destroyed the northern kingdom, when he knows that the Assyrians are on the march and Sennacherib is making his way to Jerusalem, he builds a wall all the way around the people that were living on this hill without a wall. Right? So he adds this wall, and it goes as far as the first wall. Tomorrow when we're in the Jewish quarter and we'll look down a hole and you'll see a bit of wall down there, I'll say that's going to be that wall that you can see, the first wall over there. The later wall of the second temple period goes exactly in the beginning where the wall was of the first temple period. So that was the size of Jerusalem in the first temple period before it was destroyed by the Babylonians. So understand how Jerusalem was, that God says, I put my name on the city of Jerusalem. If you look at the letter here in the valley, the Shin, you can see the Kidron is one part, the Tyropoeon or the central is the second part, and this one, the Gehenna, it makes this letter Shin. Look at the doorposts, the mezuzah on the doorposts in your hotel, and you'll see the word Shaddai. That is one of the names for God. The actual letters are the initials of three words. The Shin is Shomer. It is simply the guardian. The Daled of the Shaddai is Dlatot, the doors or the gates, and the little Yud, the little kind of one that looks like a little comma in the air, Israel, the guardian of the gates of Israel. So there is the Shin literally imprinted on the city of Jerusalem, meaning guardian, guards the city of Jerusalem. So those are your valleys. Try and remember them. We'll go through it again. Tomorrow we're going to go to David's city. We're going to go down through the water shaft, and eventually we're going to come out in that little pool over there.
That pool is the pool of Siloam. That's where Jesus actually heals a blind person, but it's Hezekiah that originally builds it, because he knows that Sennacherib is coming. He knows that the water source may be endangered because it's out there somewhere. Although there are some big fortifications around it, he wants to make sure that it's not difficult to get the water. So he digs a water tunnel that starts at the spring of Gehenna, goes underneath the city of David, runs by gravitation, and the water comes out in the pool of Siloam, which was well inside the city. So all the people had to do was to go down and fetch the water at the pool of Siloam. And that goes right through the Second Temple period, when the people used to come at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles to fetch the water, the special celebration, which was the happiness of the drawing of the water. They would come down and fetch the water here at the pool of Siloam. Tomorrow, okay, when we've been underneath David's city through the water shaft that Joab got his way up through, and when we've walked through a bit that even predates that of the Canaanite times, and we eventually make our way down to the pool of Siloam, those of you that want to will be able to walk up. They've just excavated it and opened it in the last few weeks. We've opened at Sukkot, the last part of it. You'll be able to see, can you see there are a series of white steps that go up to the right-hand side of the sort of water channel? Can you see those steps that go on up?
Yes.
You will be on those white steps that they've excavated. You'll be able to see them. That will take you right up to where we'll go later on, to the area of the shops and the entrance and the exit, where the doorways are over there, with the white steps, up by the Temple Mount. And it takes you right the way up there. And so they've excavated those uneven steps, even all the way down here, where the people used to walk. So you'll really be on a part of Jerusalem that very few people have been on yet, that is excavated, and you can say, yeah, for sure, Jesus walked down those steps. That is without a shadow of a doubt. You know, he goes down to the pool of Siloam. That is the way down to the pool of Siloam. You went down that staircase. But at some stage, you're also going to find yourselves in the water sewers of Jerusalem from the Second Temple period, because here in the model, they've left the sewers open. We now know that they were far more sophisticated than that, and the sewers were closed sewers. And you're going to go all the way up through the Second Temple period sewers to the top. Underneath the whole of the modern, you know, the road and everything else, will be in the sewers, just like the people in Jerusalem when they were running from the Romans at the very, very end. The temple was burnt. They had nowhere else to go. They knew that it was death or captivity. The people ran with their cooking pots with food in it down into the sewers down there to try and get out of Jerusalem, or to try and save their skin. And the archaeologists have found the cooking pots still intact. They got the people out, because you'll see where they bashed through the top of the sewers to get them out. They left their pots in there. So you'll be right with the last stand of the last people in Jerusalem as the temple was burning. So pretty dramatic, but that's how it's going to look, all right? So picture David's city. Now you can see that the fancy upper part of the city was where the wealthy Sadducean priests lived. They made good money, and they lived in the beautiful homes like the Romans lived. But the poor people of Jerusalem lived in the little terraced houses all the way down, and actually take away this is the bit that they've left of Aviona that they allowed to keep there. Josephus tells us about the homes of the Freemasons in this part of Jerusalem, and those are the homes of the Freemasons that were left. There is no evidence archaeologically as yet to find that in the area of David City. What you have to try and picture were poor houses like that, all stacked terraced little houses, and also like that at the time of David. All right, David had his beautiful palace towards the top part, but all the rest were these little stacked houses, which makes it very easy. You can understand how David would have seen Bathsheba in the bath when you've got those kind of houses, you know, all the way around you. But there's an expression in English, the upper classes and the lower classes. It comes from the city of Jerusalem, because the wealthy people lived in the upper city and the poor people lived in the lower city. That's where that expression comes from. So kind of picture all that. We'll go up to those uneven white steps. we've kind of driven past there because the walls of the city of Jerusalem today, remember, the architects of the Turkish Sultan Siloam the Magnificent forgot all this part of the walls. The walls today go straight up by the area of the Temple Mount and finish up there by the end of Herod's palace. And all this part of Jerusalem was left out of the present day walled city of Jerusalem. So that was the mistake. That's why they're beheaded and buried inside the Jaffa Gate. But we're going to be on those uneven white steps. When we get there tomorrow, there is a slight mistake here in the model as well. There should be 3 gates to go in and the 2 to come out, all right? It was a triple gate to go in, and it was a separate staircase. It wasn't all joined as one staircase, but 2, because you had to go to the ritual bath, you had to be ritually pure, and the danger was that if it's a whole staircase, you're going to meet people coming out of the temple that are no longer ritually pure. They've handed over their sacrifice. And so the concept here is not quite correct, but what is correct is the fact that Michael Aviona made them uneven. It's written in the Jewish source that the steps were uneven, because the idea was that when you left the temple, you couldn't turn your back on the house of God, because obviously you're walking away from it, and run. You couldn't go 2 steps at a time fast, so it was uneven, so that you had to walk carefully, some of them you'll see are wide, some of them are narrow, and so on. So we'll be on that area of the staircases, and all the way around there they've discovered about 60 public ritual baths, so people could ritually purify themselves. And just where it goes off around the corner with that staircase that comes down, you'll be able to be on the Roman pavement, and you'll see the area of the shops and where the money changers were. That's where they used to, because you come from all over the Roman Empire. You not necessarily come from the areas just of Judea, where of course they didn't mint coins with the head of Caesar, but if you come from somewhere else, then you're going to have a coin with the head of Caesar on. You cannot use that to pay your temple tax. You've got to change it to a currency that doesn't have a head of Caesar on, all right? And then you would buy your sacrifice, and then you would go to the ritual bath, and then you would make your way up to the Temple Mount itself. And we'll go on to the top part. You're going to see this afterwards. Go to the top bit up there and you're going to get a better view over. We could have ever been in the model when we had it literally to ourselves the whole time. Yeah, if you look at it from this corner, maybe you might see it a little bit better, because it's sort of, you can see the temple platform. So now you know where you were this morning and what it looked like. And take a look just at the opening of the doorway of the temple. You can see that there's a doorway, but then there's like an opening a bit higher. The opening is the height of the Dome of the Rock, all right, just to get the perspective of how big the temple was. So you came up, and you can actually see where you went out from here, which is where I showed you the green railings that go underneath the Alaximos. That takes you to the out part of the double gates down below. The area of the porticos with all the columns may have been put there as a sort of palace for Herod on the second sort of layer, because Herod knew that he wasn't considered to be properly Jewish, with his background. And did he make himself a place in the area of the court of the Gentiles that he could see the temple, but actually not contaminated with his sort of being? But anyway, we're not really sure what the top part of that area was used for. This more or less corresponds, this bit on the left hand side, the high bit, okay? This gate here, what the idea is that they should have showing it to you, as we know, the priest who stood at the doorway, remember, of the temple, had to be able to see through the different gates. So there's the Nicanor gate, the beautiful gate, and then this gate, which was actually known as the Shushan gate. Somehow it gets nicknamed the Eastern gate, but they had to be able to see through all the gates to see where we're standing on the Mount of Olives, where the priest had the red heifer. Remember, that was the only animal that was sacrificed outside the city walls, and then they used the ashes of the red heifer for the purification of the altar. So you can see the court of the Gentiles all the way around, and then if you look here from this side, you can see the little stone sort of railings, the balustrade, which had the warning signs that if you were not Jewish, then you don't go past this particular point. And that goes all the way around. And then you get like a little fortress literally around the area of the temple itself. So that was for the Jewish people only. And the first gate, which is between those two towers, would be the beautiful gate. So the story of the widow's mite takes place at the beautiful gate, remember. And it was sort of solid gold. That's why its name was the beautiful gate. Then you get into the first bit of the inner part, which is between those four first towers. And if you look over the top, you'll see there are 4 rooms, one on each corner. That was the court of the women. And the 4 rooms, there was one that kept the oil stores for the use of the candelabra. One was the wood for the use, for the sacrificing, for the fires. And then there was one for the lepers, or for at least the people that were considered cured of leprosy, and the priest had to check them. So there was a special place for them inside the court of the women. And then there was another special room for those that had taken the Nazarite vow. And then, when you look from above, for the next door, which is known as the Nicanor gates, there are semicircular staircases. And it was on those semicircular staircases that the Levites came out and played the instruments to welcome you into the temple. And at that point, the people would chant the Psalms of Ascent again. So they sang the Psalms of Ascent on their way up to Jerusalem. They often sang them even on their way up through the doorways to come to the court of the Gentiles, and then they would hear it and you sing it again on their way up to the Nicanor gate. Now at that point it's men only. The men could go inside the Nicanor gate, and just inside was the area of the altar, and there they handed over their sacrifice to the priests, who then offered it as a sacrifice. They slaughtered the animal and then gave it as a burnt offering. Morning and evening there was always an offering of a lamb for the sin of the people. So that was twice a day on a daily basis. Then you get to the doorway. Inside the doorway, all the priests could go, and that would take you into the front part of the temple. איזה כיוון אתה רוצה? אני הולכת לכיוון הזה. כן. We'll just change with them, okay?
תודה.
You can see it from over here. The actual building itself. So they go inside, and inside that part you would see the 7-branched golden candelabra. You would see the table of the showbread, and you would see the incense altar. And then there was a double veil, not one but 2, that was attached at the top and each one at the side, so that the high priest, when he went into the Holy of Holies, and remember, in the second temple there is no Ark of the Covenant. It's gone with the destruction of the Babylonians, the time of the destruction of the first temple, but still the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies on one day and one day only, and that was Yom Kippur, and he went around a double curtain, so if anything ever moved one curtain, the other one always stayed hiding the Holy of Holies. So that would be the back part. Now understand that the back part of the temple, when we go to the western wall, when Herod builds these massive retaining walls to hold up the platform, because the southern area is sitting just on these great arches, and he needs these walls to hold it up. Okay, that the closest area of exposed wall that we could come to was by where we believe the Holy of Holies was, would be where the western wall is. And so that is the concept of why that piece of wall is so important, although you will see Herodian retaining wall all the way around in parts. You see that the top of the temple was plastered with gold in a sort of zigzaggy pattern, and the reason why it was all up and down like that was so that the birds couldn't settle on the top, and they couldn't poop all over the temple. It had to be kept really pure. Right? And there was masses of gold. I mean, the reason why the Titus and the 10th Legion stood on the top of the Temple Mount area and pushed the top parts of the stones down, because when Herod built the retaining wall, he doesn't use any cement. It's just the weight of one stone sitting on the other that holds the whole construction in place. You'll see I mean, the smallest of the stones are 2.5 tons. The largest stone is about 628 American tons. I mean, it's 47 foot long, it's 10 foot high and 12 foot deep. That's the size of the stone. I mean, there's no known crane today that can lift a stone like that. How they got them up there is unbelievable. But because the gold, I mean, the fires were burning so fiercely that the gold at the top of the temple was beginning to melt, and they were worried that it would get into the razor little cracks of the temple mount or the retaining wall. So they stood there and pushed it down so it couldn't happen. They wanted every bit of gold to take back to Rome with them, and so that's why so much of the wall was destroyed at the time of the destruction of the temple. Talks about the fact that the way of the placing of the altar inside, just in front of the temple itself, was placed in such a way that it didn't matter how strong the wind was on the Temple Mount, the smoke from the sacrifice always went up in a dead straight line. It never blew left, right, or anything like that. It went directly up to God. And it tells us in the sort of stories that the women in Jerusalem never wore perfume, because the smell from the incense altar inside the temple was so strong that it would outpower any of the perfume that the women could possibly wear. So those are just little sort of stories. Today we walked out from the area of the Temple Mount on this corner through the gateway, and where the police were sitting, they did excavations and then they filled it all up with a sort of pavement. But you can see a pool. That is the sheep's pool. Okay, and that's where they washed the sheep before they took them through the sheep's gate, which is that gate through there, just before the Antonia fortress, and took them up to be sacrificed on the top of the Temple Mount. You can see the great Antonia fortress sitting on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount. The north, remember, is flat, so he puts the fortress to guard Jerusalem on the north and to guard the wonder of the ancient world, to make sure that no one was going to destroy it. So you can imagine the soldiers not only milling around the court of the Gentiles, but standing up on the parapets of the Antonia. And our educated guess is that Pontius Pilate, when he came to Jerusalem, he lived in Caesarea. That was the center of the Roman administration of Judea. But of course he came to Jerusalem on those three big feasts, on Passover, to Shavuot and Sukkot, at Tabernacles, to make sure the Jews weren't going to riot. All the time this concept, you know, that they're looking for a Messiah, someone that will throw out the rotten Romans, put a Jewish king back on the throne. So with so many people in Jerusalem, anything could happen. And so they put their soldiers on the top all the time. And at the same time, we think that Pontius would have come and been close to where the soldiers were. So that would be the area of Pontius. So you can begin to understand Jesus' movements. I mean, he comes into Jerusalem, he is in the area of the temple, he's going in and out via those uneven white steps at the southern end. But then when he realizes he won't get to the end of the week, he has his meal with his disciples somewhere in the upper city of Jerusalem. He then comes to where you are over there in Gethsemane, all right, because we've driven around that area, we'll cover it. From Gethsemane, he's taken back to the house of Caiaphas, which was somewhere in the area of the upper city. And from Caiaphas, he's taken to Pontius, so here at the Antonia. From there, he's taken to Antipas, who we believe was in residence in his father's palace over there, where we were. We looked at Herod's palace. For sure, he would have been scourged in the Antonia, because that's where the Roman soldiers are, and that's where the scourgings would take place. So we bring him back over here to the Antonia. And from there, he would carry the crossbeam either to where, there you can see the area of Golgotha, the Garden 2 area over there, or the traditional route of the Way of the Cross, which would take you through the gateway over there to where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is today. All right, where I showed you the other place that's a possibility. Okay, you get the movements backwards and forwards through Jerusalem. It's a lot of going backwards and forwards. And then where the bird was just taking a